Last week we talked about slope and rate of change of a line. We looked at some graphs, we looked at tables, we looked at function rules. So today we're kind of putting it together into slope-intercept form, which is going to come up a lot, slope-intercept form. So it says, when a diver descends in a lake or an ocean, pressure is produced by the weight of the water on the diver. As a diver swims deeper into the water, the pressure on the diver's body increases at a rate of 1 atmosphere of pressure per 10 meters of depth. That is 1 atmosphere of pressure per 10 meters of depth. The table and the graph below represent the total pressure Y on a diver given the depth underwater in meters. So, where it says, write an equation describing the relationship between the pressure exerted on the diver and the diver's depth underwater. So we can either do that from this table or from this graph. Let's go ahead and label our table. What is X on the table?
The atmosphere pressure, the depth underwater.
Depth underwater in meters. And what is Y? The pressure. Because this is X, this is always Y. Everybody should know that by now. So if we want to write an equation, the pressure is going to be equal to, so Y or F of X is equal to, where does it start? How many feet underwater does this graph start?
0.
No, so
1.
Oh, wait. Well, okay, sorry. Where does the pressure start? 1. So before you even get under the water, you're under 1 atmosphere of pressure. And how much is it going up for each meter you go underwater? Look at how much it's going up here. 0.1. So that's 0.1 for every meter, so 0.1x, plus the original atmosphere of pressure that you start with. Okay, it wants to know what is the slope of the line. So we can either look at the table or look at the graph. If I look at the graph, I'm going to look at this point and this point. So what is the rise? 1. And what is the run? 10. So if I converted that to a decimal, what would that look like? That would be 0.1. Do I see this in this equation somewhere?
Yeah.
Yes. So we talked about that last week. Remember, we talked about the coefficient of x is the slope or the rate of change. Now, what is the y-intercept? So what is the definition of y-intercept? Where it crosses the y-axis. So where does this line cross the y-axis?
At 0, 1.
At 0, 1. So do we have a 1 somewhere in our equation?
No.
Yes.
What do you mean? Yeah.
So I had a slope of 0.1 and I had a y-intercept of 1. So in a linear equation, the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, this is very important and you need to memorize this, y equals mx plus b. M, remember what M stood for last week? Slope. It still stands for slope. And the new letter that we're learning today is B, stands for the y-intercept. So look back at our equation we wrote. M would stand for slope, 0.1, which is what we got. And B would be the y-intercept, which is where across the y-axis. So if we're looking at this equation here, y equals negative 2x plus 9, it wants us to identify the slope and the y-intercept. So first, what is the slope? Negative 2. So the slope is negative 2 because that's the m that's in front of the x. And then what is the y-intercept or the b? 9. All you're doing is looking at it as in a formula, y equals mx plus b. So m is the slope, negative 2. 9 is the y-intercept because that's the b. All right, on to the next page. So we're still looking at the same equation. So we're still looking at y equals negative 2x plus 9, but now we're going to make a table and a graph out of those points. So basically we're going to check and see what we just said. So what did we just say the slope was?
0.1x.
The negative 2, and what was the y-intercept? 9.
Oh,
So let's go ahead and check and see if we still come up with the same thing when we make a table and a graph. So y equals negative 2x plus 9, plug in negative 2, so y equals negative 2 times negative 2 plus 9. So that would be positive 4 plus 9, which is 13. So go ahead and quickly finish this table and graph the points. So these are the points that you should have gotten. We have 0, 9, 2, 5, 4, 1, and 5, negative 1. When you graph it, you should get a straight line. It is a linear equation. So number 6 wants us to explain how to find the value of the slope only looking at the table. How can I find slope by looking at the table? Right, so we need to do the change in y divided by the change in x. The change in y divided by the change in x, or the slope formula. So I can pick any 2 points. What's the change from 1 to negative 1?
2.
Is it positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative, so negative 2. And then the change in x would be what?
1.
1. So that was positive 1. So what is negative 2 over positive 1? Negative 2.
But what if we use 0 and 2? Why don't we use that?
Okay, so what's the change from 9 to 5?
4.
Negative 4. What's the change from 0 to 2?
2.
So what's negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. Which is how we know it's a straight line, because it has a slope, the same slope between all of the points. So the slope is negative 2. Is that the same thing we said when we looked at the equation? Yeah. All right. How can I find the y-intercept just by looking at the table? What? Where x is 0. Where x is 0 is going to be the y-intercept. So we will look for where x is 0. No. Because x equals 0 right here on the axis. So we're looking for where x is 0, so y would be 9. So the y-intercept is 9. Does that match what we said up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, we said b equals 9. That's the y-intercept. Explain how to find the value of the slope from the graph. What do we need to do that?
Rise over run.
Count the rise over the run. So if I count the rise over the run, pick any 2 points. I'm going to do this one and this one. How far did I need to rise?
4.
Negative 4. So that would be negative 4 over what would the run be?
3.
2.
Oh.
Which reduces to negative 2. So we're still getting the same thing we got from the equation and from the table. How do I find the y-intercept on the graph? Not where it begins, but where it crosses the y-axis. That's where it crosses the y-axis. Where does it cross the y-axis? It crosses the y-axis here at 9. So that means that the y-intercept is 9. Does that match the table in the equation? Yes. So that's 3 different ways to find the slope and the y-intercept. All right. On the next page, we're going to do the check your understanding together. It says, what are the slope and y-intercept of the line described by y equals negative 4/5 x minus 10? So what is the slope?
-4/5.
-4/5. And what is the y-intercept?
-10.
-10. So that's pretty simple and straightforward. You can get your slope and your y-intercept just from looking at that equation. Number 11 wants us to take this table and write the function rule, write the equation. So in your homework from this weekend, you kind of had to guess and check to find your function rule. But now we have a more direct way of doing this. So what two pieces of information do I need to know to write it in slope-intercept form? The slope and the intercept. That's why it's called slope-intercept form, because you need the slope and the y-intercept. So which one of those is very obvious right now? What can I see?
1, 2.
That 0, 5 is going to be what? The y-intercept. So B is going to equal what? 5. Very easy. So the other thing I need is I need M. I need my slope. So pick any 2 points, do the change in y over the change in x. So from 1 to -1 is what?
+2. -2.
-2. So that's my rise, or that's my change in y's. And then I need to find my change in x.
+1.
+1. So that reduces to -2. So now I have an M and a B. So I can fill in my equation y equals mx plus b. So that would be y equals what?
2, -2 plus
-2x plus 5. So you exchange the m for -2 because that's the slope that we just found, and the b for 5 because that is the y-intercept. So in y equals mx plus b, it would be y equals -2x plus 5. All right, number 12. Write the equation in slope-intercept form of a line with a slope of 4 and a y-intercept of 5. So y equals what? 4x plus 5. Number 13, write an equation for this graph over here. So what two pieces of information do I need? The slope and the intercept, the y-intercept. So first of all, the slope, so pick 2 points. I'm going to pick this one and this one. So what's the rise here? -2. And what is the run? 1. So that's -2 over 1, which reduces to -2. And what is the y-intercept? 6. Where it crosses the y-axis is at 6. So this would be y equals what? -2x plus 6. All right. So here's another real-world situation using the linear equation y equals mx plus b. Monica gets on an elevator in a skyscraper. It starts to move at a rate of -20 feet per second. After 6 seconds, she's at 350 feet from the ground floor of the building. So it says the rate of the elevator is negative. What does this mean in the situation?
It's going down.
The elevator is going down. What value in the slope-intercept form of an equation does this represent?
What?
The rate of -20 feet per second. Which part of the slope-intercept equation would you plug that in for?
The slope.
The slope. So it represents the slope. What was another word for slope that we used last week? Rate of change. It represents the slope, which is also the rate of change. So she's going at a rate of negative 20 feet per second, that is the rate of change or the slope. So that's one of those key words that you need to look for when you see rate. That is going to be your slope.
Yes.
How many feet was she above the ground when she got on the elevator?
350.
Reread that.
Unknown. I don't know.
Well, after 6 seconds, she's 350 feet on the ground. So where was she 6 seconds ago?
Let me do the math.
Zero.
No, she went down 20 feet per second.
Oh, she was at 470, right?
All right, Cam, how did you figure that out?
Oh, because you have to do negative 20 times 6, because that's how much she went down. And then you have to add it to 350 to find out where she started originally.
Right. So the rate times the number of seconds, that means she went 120 feet down. And we add that to the 350 feet where she ended. And you find out that she started at 470 feet above the ground.
Wow. She's dying.
What value in the slope-intercept form does 470 feet? Where are we going to plug that in?
The Y.
The y-intercept.
Why though?
So the y-intercept is always the starting point. It is always the original starting point. So write an equation in slope-intercept form for the motion of the elevator since it started to move. What do x and y represent? So first let's write this equation. Y equals what?
X plus B. M plus B.
Well, okay, mx plus b. What was my m?
Yeah.
Negative 20. So y equals negative 20x plus 470, which is her starting point, the y-intercept. So she's starting at 470 and she's going down 20 feet per second. So what does x stand for? The number of seconds. And what does y stand for? No. If I plug in a number of seconds, what am I going to get out? The feet, her feet from the ground. So if I plug in, like we plugged in 6 seconds, then we would find out she was 350 feet from the ground. So this would be feet from the ground. And it goes back to say, what does the y-intercept represent? And we already kind of talked about it. It was where she started. So it wants us to use the equation to determine at this rate, how long will it take for her, after she enters, for her to exit on the ground floor. So we're looking for how long, which is what? Is that x or y?
X. X. Because you know.
X was the number of seconds. So we're looking for x. That's what we're looking for. How long? So if I have y equals negative 20x plus 470. How long, so we're solving for x, will it take her to get to the ground floor? The ground floor would be what? 0. And plug that in for what? Which one stands for height above the ground? Y. So we plug that in for y. So 0 equals negative 20x plus 470. And we are solving for x because we want to know how long it takes, which is the seconds.
Yes.
So what do I need to do first?
Subtract 470.
subtract 470 from both sides. So that's negative 470 equals negative 20x. Then what do?
Divide by 20.
Divide by negative 20.
I'm doing it.
So you get 23.5 equals x. So what does that mean? Right. So she reaches the ground floor after 23.5 seconds.
That's a long time.
Wow.
All right. Number 17 is asking you to write this equation in slope-intercept form. So what does slope-intercept form look like? Okay, so if I want this to look like this, what needs to be the only thing on the left side? Y. The only thing I want on the left side is y. So if I have 3x minus 2y equals 16. This is back to those literal equations that we love so much.
I love them.
And we are trying to get y by itself on the left-hand side. What do I need to do first? Subtract 3x from both sides. We are going to subtract 3x from both sides. So that cancels and leaves me negative 2y equals negative 3x plus 16. And I'm putting it in that order because I want it to look like mx plus b.
But wait, if we're trying to get y by itself, what do we do? Like remove the minus 2.
How do we remove the
Like move it to the right side.
divide by
-2 and then you just
No, but
divide by negative 2 from on everything?
okay.
So that cancels and leaves me y equals negative 3 over negative 2. We're just going to leave as positive 3 over 2. X. 16 divided by negative 2 is minus 8. So to get this into slope-intercept form, these are the steps we have to take. All right. A flowering plant stands 6.5 inches tall when it is placed under a growing light. Its growth is 1/4 inch per day. Today, the plant is 11.25 inches tall. First, we need to write an equation in slope-intercept form. So if I'm going to write an equation, I need m, which is the rate. What is the rate?
0.25.
0.25. That's the growth per day. And what is my starting point, my y-intercept?
6.5.
6.5. So to write that as an equation, I'm going to write y equals what?
6.5x. I mean 0.25x.
Plus 6.5. So 0.25x plus 6.5. So in this equation, what does x represent?
The inches per day.
How much it grows per day?
Well, 0.25 is how much it grows per day, but just what is x?
The
So
inches.
the amount of days, the number of days. Because you're multiplying the growth times the number of days. And what does y tell me?
The starting point.
Not the y-intercept,
Oh.
the total growth, so the height after it grows. Use the equation to determine how many days ago the plant was placed under the light. So if I'm trying to find how many days, what am I solving for?
X.
X, because X stood for days. So if I use my equation, y equals 0.25x plus 6.5. What am I plugging in for y?
11.25
Right. I'm plugging in how tall it is today, which is 11.25. And I'm plugging in to find out how many days ago they started growing this plant. So what do I need to do to both sides? Subtract 6.5. So you get 4.75 equals 0.25x. Divide both sides by 0.25, so x equals 19.
Wow.
So the plant started growing 19 days ago.
That's it for today.
Number 19 asks you to find the slope and the y-intercept from this equation. Well, to be able to do that, what do I need to do first?
You gotta subtract 3x.
So I got to get it in what form?
Intercept.
Slope-intercept form. So before I can do anything, I need to get it into slope-intercept form. So I'm going to take the 3x plus 6y equals 12. And what do I need to get by itself? Y. So what do I need to do to both sides? Subtract 3x from both sides. So 6y equals negative 3x plus 12. And then what do I do? Divide everything by 6. So y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2.
I don't know what happened.
What is 3 over 6 reduced?
No, you look.
1/2.
Okay, negative 3x over 6.
Alright, so the slope is what?
Slope is
Negative 1/2. And what is the y-intercept? 2. Number 20 asks for you to write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that has a slope of 2/3 and a y-intercept of negative 5. So y equals what? Minus 5. So it's y equals 2/3 x minus 5. That's the slope. That's the y-intercept. All right, number 22. Matt sells used books on the internet. He has a weekly fee that he has to pay for his website. He graphed his possible weekly earnings as shown. So first, it wants to know what is the weekly fee that he pays. This one's kind of confusing. Let's look at what the x and y stand for first. So x stands for what?
Number of books sold.
Number of books sold, and the y is? So how much money he made. So if he sells 0 books, how much money does he make?
Negative 750.
So if he sells 0 books, he is losing $7.50 to what? His website. He's paying for his website. So he's paying them $7.50. That's why if he sells 0 books, he is at negative $7.50 because he owes for the website. How much does he make for each book that he sells?
1.5.
So if we want to figure this out, you can pick 2 points. So we can do the slope. It would go up 1.5 and over 1. So yes, it's $1.50. Each book that he sells he makes $1.50. Which one of those is the starting points, the y-intercept?
Negative 750.
The negative 750. That's going to be our b, our y-intercept. Which one is the slope? 150. He makes $1.50 per book. That would be the slope. So to write this in slope-intercept form, y equals 150 minus 750. So it's $1.50 he makes per book minus the original $7.50 he is paying for that website. How many books does he have to sell to make $30? How can I figure this out? Plug it in for Y. X is the number of books sold, which is what I'm looking for. Y is the earnings. So I plug in the earnings for Y. So 30 equals $1.50 X minus $7.50. So what do I need to do to both sides? Add $7.50 to both sides. So $37.50 equals $1.50 X, and then what do I do? Divide by $1.50 on both sides. Which is 25. So he must sell 25 books.
Sorry. Are you recording?
Yes,
Alright, without graphing, describe the graph of each equation below. Tell whether it is ascending, which means going up, or descending, which means going down from left to right, and where does it cross the y-axis. So first for A, what is the slope? 3. So is it ascending or descending? Ascending, because it's what? It's positive, which tells me it's going up. And what is the y-intercept? 0. There's nothing being added or subtracted, so the y-intercept is 0. Part B, what is the slope? 5. So is it ascending or descending? Ascending. And what is the y-intercept? 2. C, what is the slope? -2. Is it ascending or descending? Descending. And what is the y-intercept? -5. For the last one, what is the slope? Is it ascending or descending?
Descending.
Descending. And what is the y-intercept? 4.